it needs time to go dormant and go inside and do its work, to process and categorize.
And I needed that time to let the louder voices get quiet.
Yeah. Yeah, it reminds me of when I was a kid. And I used to find myself just randomly, I'd go outside and lay in the grass and just stare at the clouds and just kind of zone out and watch the sky. I used to do the same thing. We had popcorn ceilings when I was a kid. And so I used to love to lay down on my back and look at the ceiling and try to find faces or shapes in the ceiling. But that really, I think that was my body wanting a trance state. It was wanting a time where it could just be and not be so activated looking for potential threats or whatever on the horizon.
Yeah. And it really gives the chance for the activity in the brain and some of the buildup of neurotoxins that occur from constant stimulation to level out. So from a neurochemical perspective, when you go into states, I think the word they're using these days in research is states of boredom. But you could think of it as state of trance as well. When you're allowing that, there is less reactivity, less, let's call it neurotoxin buildup from the constant churning of energy in your mind. And, when that's happening, you're processing ideas, you're processing new information. But if you create a space of calm, a space of trance, a space of boredom, you're allowing some of that activity to slow down and some of those toxins to clear out. So they, on many levels, the physiological down to the cellular level to the metaphysical, you are opening up yourself to greater states of awareness.
Yeah. Well, and what it makes me think of is it's almost like the mind, just like the body needs time to digest the food we've consumed before we consume more, the mind ideally needs to digest the information and the data, and especially when we're making changes, because that's always going to employ the mind. So when I'm making lifestyle changes, then the mind has a whole new slew of, stimuli and data to understand and make sense of. So we do need to give our mind time to digest. And to your point, from my perspective, when I'm working with a client and I am connecting to be the vessel on the channel for what they need to receive, because it's not my agenda. It doesn't matter if the information I get makes sense to me. It doesn't have to be relevant to me because it's not about me. It's about the client. But I have to be empty. I can't be activated if I'm distracted or, kind of all over the place. That's why I always give myself at least a few minutes to sit and just be. And by now my body knows the process, so it doesn't take as long to get centered as it used to. But in the beginning, like I sometimes would take 45 minutes before a client just to meditate and just to really ensure that I was in a state where what I was hearing was not my own voice, not my own mind, and not my own noise. It was really connecting to that singular consciousness, that, the collective mind. And that's how, in order for me to do that, I have to be still inside.
Yeah. And I think that might be helpful to other people because it's a practice, it's a process. And the first time you try it may take quite a while for your body to settle down and your mind to settle down and for you to hear some of the quieter voices or just to be in a state of peace. So yeah, give yourself some compassion and time to do that.
Yeah, and I think it's a good kind of image for people to have, that they can think of themselves as the teacher and all of their voices and impulses as students in their classroom. It's not about excluding any of those children. That, they're all just as important as the other, but to give yourself the authority and to remind yourself that as the sovereign, you sit at the head of the class behind that desk. And so you're the one that gets to decide which voices get the most attention. And if you somehow forget, which we all do, and realize like, oh, suddenly I'm in the classroom and one of my students is now on my desk, I just have to remember to go back up and tell them to take their seat. So I think it's a really effective mind frame people can use to give themselves that authority and remember that, yeah, you might have a little crafty student who's really, really good at distracting you and throwing you off, but eventually you'll remember and you go, oh yeah, and you reset and come back.
Yeah.
Because it does take, I think when you were saying, like, at first it might feel strange. At first it will feel uncomfortable. It reminds me of the first time I went to the gym. I was totally overwhelmed. I didn't really know what to do. Reminds me of the first time I smoked a cigarette. I thought it was disgusting. and I swore I would never smoke again. But then guess what? 15 years later, I was like a pack-a-day smoker. So it's understanding that, you walked into the pool and suddenly you find yourself in the deep end. Well, then you're just reversing it. And so give yourself that compassion to understand it's always going to be a process.
Yeah. And I would say, secondly, that you want to consider what the body has to tell you. And you want to try to get clear on the purity of that body's message.
Yeah.
Not any programs laid on top, or any patterns and habits laid on top, but actually what is the body asking for in that decision.
Yeah. And, Joe Dispenza talks about that, how the body becomes the mind, because the mind, just like that student in the class who is more, who is louder and more outgoing, they just by default are going to be, they're going to probably become someone who is used to getting that kind of attention. If I'm always the star of the show, then I come to expect that. And it's the same thing. Like, we have elevated the mind and intellect to this level where it doesn't necessarily need to be, because there are other modes of thinking and feeling and living that are just as much, if not more accurate. But over time, the body and its quieter voice, like that kid in the back of the class that doesn't raise its hand, it just goes, okay, well, no one's ever going to hear me, so I'm just going to stop raising my hand. But to your point, giving ourselves that stillness and the space to go, oh, wow, there is a shy little quiet one in the back of the classroom, and I never even knew it.
Yeah.